Hello and welcome to the Sociology Staffroom. We have Vicky Lyons speaking to us today about EAL, English as Additional Language. Really excited for lots of different reasons about this. I think one, because as a sociology teacher, it's something we talk about, and secondly, obviously, just to enhance that my own personal pedagogy, but I'm sure for other people as well. So, hello, Vicky. First of all, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. You all right?
So yeah, I'm good. I'm very good actually. Look, we had our summer. That one day was our summer. So I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, I got a sunburn, so it's fine.
So anyhow, please tell us first a little bit about yourself. Tell me, Vicky, about sort of your background and how you got into understanding and working with the AEL and your background.
Okay, so I've been a teacher for over a decade. I think it's about 13 years, 14 years now. I was a history specialist and then kind of transferred into social sciences. So I delivered sociology and psychology as well, only at A level, though I taught history all the way through. Sociology, we were a very successful department, which was really, really positive. We had some very good ALPS results and things like that. So excellent stuff all on there. And I really enjoyed teaching those two subjects. I know a lot of us do. A lot of the social scientists out there do teach both subjects, which is always a really lovely balance. And yeah, so I did that for like I said, over a decade. And recently I've transitioned out of the classroom into the county council. I work for a team called MTAS. Most of you have equivalents in your regions, in your areas, and we work with minority ethnic children and families, including new arrivals and second and third generation migrants. And we also deal with part of the team deal with supporting traveller families and all of the groups within that. And so yeah, so I've now kind of transitioned out of the classroom. So I really only do tutoring now for the A level subjects, and I work primarily training schools and working with children specifically to unpick if there are where the barriers are, um, appropriate strategies to apply to support them, provisions and things like that. And then on the other hand, when I was in the classroom, I was a Senko as well. So I went down the kind of inclusive teaching and learning route. I focused specifically on inclusive teaching and learning, special educational needs, and then kind of expanded to the EDI agenda and intersectionality, which is a big focus for all of us at the moment in educational discourse. So a bit of a many hats at some point. So it's all kind of come together under my current role as an advisory teacher.
Oh my goodness, I feel like there's so many other questions I now want to ask you. Like, I feel like now my head's going. It's funny enough, just before I came here, I was talking um, to Duncan, who is our sociology lead for Tutor to You, about some of the things you've just mentioned, particularly the traveller community. So I might, if there's an opportunity to find out other little things, I'm sure there's lots of teachers that sort of get support with that, the strategies you've said, and obviously for lots of different reasons, not just because we care about pedagogy, but obviously as sociologists as well. Obviously, for those people, we know what EAL stands for, English as Additional Language, but from a sort of professional sense, what, because we sort of had a little pre-chat before you came on, and some of the sort of, I suppose, just the clarity around it and what that means, because I've done my own little bit of research before I came on, just to sort of make sure that I understand the Bell Foundation does a bit of work, has done some research on that, and that actually there's not much when it gets to our sort of level, which is GCSE A level. I think it's post 16, there's only a 2 to 3% difference, although say only, a difference is a difference between students that are English as additional language and those that are not. So obviously it's a difference, but not, say, for other factors within education. But yeah, tell me a little bit more about what that means and what that looks like for us as A-level teachers.
Yeah, I suppose because at post 16 there are many different routes, you probably see the kind of disparity in outcome change because actually you're probably having a small selection of the students going up into the A level kind of courses, and that's fantastic, obviously, because it means that children are and young people are going into educational routes that really hopefully support their interests, their engagement, their academic profile, their proficiency and their skills and their employment opportunities and all those wonderful things, and they can then thrive. So the likelihood is that the children who are taking A levels as that quite traditional academic route are probably the ones that have the highest level of proficiency in English, and therefore they are on par with their peers, their first language, English as a first language peers. So the disparity probably is smaller. What I would be interested in seeing is how underrepresented they are in the entries. So in terms of our population of learners who come with English as an additional language, out of that overall kind of cohort, how many of them are accessing A level, and how many of them are maybe siphoned off into the less academic courses, not because of those things that I've just listed, their engagement and their interest and their employment options, but actually because they simply don't have the proficiency in English to access it at that point. And that would be the real problem for me, because that shows that actually the A levels are not supporting EAL learners, and therefore ultimately limiting their options as learners and as developing adults, and eventually whatever route they take. So that could be it.
Yeah, and I suppose for us as teachers, our sort of key responsibility is to ensure engagement and that students are maximising their potential. And obviously, if they're capable academically of doing A levels, our job is to therefore ensure those students are getting the support and strategies that require. Obviously, if they get it in whatever school. I know that different schools have different requirements to get in, so it might be X amount of level 9s to 5s, or some does do it as a point system. So we know this, sociology, particularly the social science, but sociology for sure is a very dense subject from an essay writing point of view. You've got those big 30 markers, your 20 markers. You've also got those sort of 10 markers where they've got to take something from an item and make a
Oh,
link.
yeah, there are some really high level skills in those questions, even the smaller answer questions. Yeah, yeah.
So then, yes, so from a sort there's lots of positives, isn't there, as well? And I would think that's important to talk about as well for those students that we may have in the classroom that English is their additional language. But how can we support them the best we can, one, inside the classroom and also outside the classroom? How can we do that? I know there's lots of different strategies that are out there, but what would you say in your role as an advisor?
So really, it's just about adaptive teaching and quality first teaching. I think what we have to realise is if you've got a young person who has that EAL profile, it's being able to gauge their proficiency level. So as you mentioned, the Bell Foundation is one of like a absolutely fantastic pool of resources, and in it will tell you about the standards in terms of the developing levels of proficiency in English. And you start from A, which is kind of absolutely new to the language. There is no vocabulary, you do not speak it, understand it, etc. And you go through to fluent, and that should be, and I say should be because it's quite nuanced, that you are able to engage independently in all work, not as if you were a first language speaker, because as I'll say in a second, the agility of language is actually far more nuanced than that. But at least you can work independently, access textbooks at an age appropriate level, and at a kind of the academic level required of you. So what in terms of that, you've got to think, well, my students are probably at that top level of proficiency, which means that they can speak it, read it, understand it. But I think as A level teachers, we know that actually real skilled A level studying and understanding and thriving in those subjects goes beyond the basic comprehension of this is what the information says and this is how I'm going to recall it. And that for A level teachers with EAL students is where the key is, because actually it takes many years for a child who is learning English as an EAL student, takes them far longer to nail that intuitive academic language that we develop over our entire educational lives when we've been in the British education system since the age of 3 or 4, and when we've been immersed in the English language all the time.
Mm.
And so that is the biggest thing. So what that's called is it's called CALPS, which is cognitive academic language, essentially. And that's the key for us, because actually we know as A-level teachers, we need children and young people who are agile with language. They experiment with language. They are able to infer from that item, that 10 marker. The trick to that one is not the length necessarily, it's that ability to read that item and be able to play with it and experiment with it and take that prior learning, activate it and blend it and bring in all those facts and data and even the kind of hypotheticals. And that is something that is actually beyond being a fluent English speaker. That requires skill level that those EAL learners need to be supported with. And that's, I think, the key at A level. Obviously, the longer the student has been in the country, the longer they've had to be exposed to that kind of learning. And you would hope it, you know, if they've been in GCSEs and Key Stage 3 particularly as well, they've probably acquired those skills. But some of those learners may not have had that length of time. And also, if they maybe migrated when they were in year 7, they would have spent the first 3 or 4 years acquiring basic language, not the cognitive language. So they're always going to be a step behind their first language peers. And I think as A level teachers, that's the focus. It's not the can they read and understand it, it's can they elaborate, interrogate, develop, think on that top A level plane. And if they're not able to express themselves in that way, that's what's going to prevent them from really thriving and ultimately gaining the outcome they deserve.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the thing you said, like the outcome those students deserve. So, what can we, so on a practical level, you know, you've got a sociology teacher with one, two, multiple students with EAL in their classroom. Obviously, there's positives, you know, with that, you know, there's sort of, you know, multiple understanding of languages and, you know, I've got a bit of a biased story behind it because my mum's English is additional language. So my mum's understanding of, I know, the English language is sometimes better because of the way that she was taught and how adjectives and nouns and all that sort of thing that's like, you know, makes up a sentence. And there's lots of understanding of that. But then how do we, like you said, that sort of cognitive understanding, how do we, and that's sort of, I think you use the word agility, how do we, I suppose, support our students with that in the lesson?
Well, I think with any student, it's all about exposure and immersion in language. I think don't be afraid to sometimes prioritize kind of experimentation and engagement with the language over the content. And I know that everyone's going to scream at me and they're going to say the A level's too big as it is. I don't have enough time to cover it. But actually, the more that you experiment with the information, transforming it, using, you know, use different words, build up a vocabulary bank of synonyms and antonyms and connectives, create complexity within sentences. Don't just focus on one word answers or one sentence, but how about you give them the paragraph and they transform it? All of these things immerse them in language, and the more you do it, and that's the key, it has to be done consistently, because if you introduce a person to a new term and then don't return to it for another half a term, it's not going to have made the impact. It's not going to be kind of profound in their learning, and they're probably not going to be able to apply it intuitively independently by themselves. So don't be afraid to there's a fantastic term when it comes to metacognition called productive failure, you know, in terms of you're not
Like the
trying
term.
to get them, yeah, it's a fantastic thing. So it's basically you're not trying to teach them the spec, you're not trying to teach them, you know, how to go from A to B or B to C. You're actually teaching them those skills of critical thinking. So it might be problem solving, and the content, the spec is not the hero of the task. It's the critical thinking skills that are the things that are being refined. Because let's face it, they could write an essay or they could do a quiz for homework. You don't need to give them the quiz in the lesson. They could do that at another time. You are there as a facilitator to kind of nurture critical thinkers, and if you're doing that, that is sometimes needed. I've done lessons before where entire lessons have been, I think I did one on the Industrial Revolution, and the focus was actually riddles. They had to solve riddles to get from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Yes, the information in the riddles were about the Industrial Revolution, but I actually wanted my students to refine their critical thinking skills, their problem solving skills. Generation is another term with that metacognition is sometimes ignored. The low stakes quizzing is the thing that everyone kind of has taken away from the Ofsted handbook. But actually, generating solutions, generating uh, journeys of solutions, so that even if the outcome is wrong, you have generated a journey of problem solving, and you learn from those mistakes, or you learn from the strengths. So I think it's all about language immersion and chances and opportunities to experiment with it. I think that's probably a really effective way of doing it, and there's so many different teaching and learning opportunities to do that. It really does depend on the child or young person, because even if you have 5 EAL students in your class, they're not a homogenous group. They're all going to have different academic profiles, different proficiency levels, different engagement levels, different personalities, because ultimately that's paramount, isn't it? That our children and young people feel safe and secure. You're never going to have a thriving learner if they are not secure learners. So I can't say that there's like a one size fits all rule for teaching EAL. It's knowing your students and knowing what they respond to and what they resonate with best.
There's so much there, so much you just said, and I wrote a couple of words down. Obviously, productive failure in is generation. Is it generations? Is that what
Yeah.
you said? Yeah, and so like what people have taken away. Funny enough, I was speaking about this the other day with someone. Is that idea? There's a lot around retrieval practice, but actually, it's more than that. It's that high order thinking, that metacognition you mentioned. Just sort of, I suppose there's a question around that, and this again maybe a leading question, but my sense from listening to you talk that all these methods would work for all students. So yes, you're mindful of your students that may have EAL, and obviously, like you said, they're not a homogenous group. There's lots of students that will have different coming up with different skills and attributes, like you said. But actually, all those techniques, that adaptive learning, those approaches work for all students. So I remember we had a guest on, or nearly the beginning of the last year actually, that talked about oracy in the classroom and how important that is. And when you were talking, it made me really flick back to that, and how oracy and that sort of, like you talked about, immersive, getting immersive with language is sort of a really good way to do that, and then to get familiar with key terms and sort of
Well,
thinking about that.
what you've got to remember is oracy is the foundation of literacy. So if you skip that, if you feel that, oh, it's all right, they write in their exam, I'm not going to worry about their understanding of the verbal word and being able to express themselves, then you have absolutely, you've just compromised their entire academic development, and you're never going to see the impact from your teaching. That if you can't say it, you can't write it. If you can't say it, you can't read it, which means you can't then write it. So you've got to have that linguistic exposure verbally. And now, I mean, some children are shy, right? So I'm not saying that you have to force children to do participate in oracy based tasks all the time, but what I'm also saying is that their inner voice, if they can say it in their mind, they can, in English, they can write it. Ultimately the spelling will come, the writing will come, but it's got to be said first. And so oracy tasks are fantastic, and they are the foundation of the foundation for all teachers to really understand, for all their learners, but particularly their learners with EAL profiles.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like a lot of what you said makes so much sense. And I was just thinking, how lots of students would just benefit from all of these strategies. And like you said, the role of, particularly, I can't speak for other subjects, but I know a lot of the humanities, critical thinking is the skill, isn't it? That's what you're developing. It's not a bank of just knowledge, and carrying around this jar of key concepts and studies and theories. That those have to be manipulated, assessed, compared, contrasted, which is obviously, like you said, that high order thinking. I know that you talked about, before we came on, was AI, and we've spoken to another guest about AI, ChatGPT particularly, and how we can use that in the classroom. How then, I know that you're quite interested in that and how we can use that with EAL students, and I was thinking, oh, how does that work? Is it just particular, or is it one of those things again that are really good for students, and particularly it benefits? I think sometimes I find that a lot of the strategies particularly help EAL students, or students may have educational needs, but then actually all students benefit from it anyhow. So it's not like, I'm trying to think back to when my first teaching training was, different colours of paper for different students, which is, makes me cringe when I think back to it. Like I remember even then thinking, this is terrible. Like, why would you give someone different colour paper and different activities? And obviously now lots of research suggests that's not the right way to go about it. But yes, tell me more about how we can use
Yeah.
AI EA
It's
students.
it's obviously still really early days. We're exploring, and I want to preface this with that this is definitely an area that I am exploring with other advisory teachers in the southeast as well. So we have set up a small working group where we're playing with it, and I'm focusing specifically on marking and feedback. So yeah, you're right, a lot of this probably could be used for all learners. It's quality first practice, and there are definitely flaws, there are definitely risks with using this, as there always is with any teaching and learning tool. There's always a risk, and it's really about, is it a manageable risk? Is it an acceptable risk? Are there, or is it going to derail the entire lesson? So, for example, big thing about Chat GTP, and the reason why we're focusing on that is obviously because it's free. And so you don't have to pay subscription fees or anything like that. There's a big problem is that quite often it's hard to get on. If there's too many users, you try and go on and it just says we're too busy, we can't do it. So, well, if you've got period 2 sociology and you're planning on the whole lesson to use Chat GTP, your whole lesson is derailed. So there are things like that there's unpredictability with Chat GTP. But when it does when it is accessible, there could be some really effective ways to use it. So one of the things that I've been playing with is the marking and feedback. So what we have to really remember is that we want to utilize the young person's first language, and that's key. Don't ignore the person's first language, because that's the language they're most proficient in. So that's where they can really express themselves most, and it's probably where they feel most secure. It's also like an equity rich model. Our EAL learners spend so much of their time being told about their deficit. They're being measured in the area that they know is their weakest area. It's an area that they can't, they can work and work and work, but they know they're not as proficient. So one of the things that we looked at, and I was looking at, was how I can use Chat GTP to potentially translate, but mark work in that student's first language. Now, I am not fluent, I'm monolingual, I'm horrific. I do not speak any other language. And so if I asked a child or a young person to write an essay for me in their first language, I wouldn't know if it's correct. So Chat GTP, you can do that. You can give it a mark scheme, for example, with the levels. You'd have to type it up yourself. So, there's a little bit of work that has to go into this, like there is for any teaching and learning tool. The more information you give the engine, the more specific and the more effective it will give you the responses. So you can give it a mark scheme, say the 30 mark essay. There are 4 levels or 5 levels, whatever it is, and you've got success criteria of the things that you can show it, and now what you can then do is you can ask the student to write their full essay in their first language into the engine, and so let's say it's Ukrainian. So they're typed, because obviously that's a big group at the moment that a lot of our students are, we've got a larger amount of refugees coming in. So let's say they type in Ukraine and they're happy. They're typing in the language that they are most proficient in, they're most confident in. They type in, and then what you can do is Chat GTP will mark that and give them feedback in their first language. And I've tried it, and it levels it accurately. So I wrote an answer in
So it
English.
actually marks it for you.
It leveled it. It
Oh,
leveled it.
leveled
So
it.
that's the thing.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I
I
gave
did not know that.
Yeah. So I gave an answer to a question, and I knew it was a kind of a low level answer. All right. I didn't want to make it a perfect answer. I wanted to see whether or not they could identify answers that were kind of low range, low, like maybe like the level 2 out grade level. I wrote it and I asked it to translate it into Ukrainian for me, and it did. And then
Goodness
so I
me.
bless you. So I then and then I translated it back because I wanted to see, because obviously we do have a big problem with translating apps and translating programs. They sometimes will lose the integrity of the stuff, gets lost in translation. And I wanted to check that if it went into Ukrainian or if, and then came back, the meaning of the work hadn't been lost. And it wasn't. Some of the wording was slightly different, but I hadn't lost the gist of the
So
work,
you
and it was
can
fine.
translate as well in it as well, is that what
You
you're
can
saying? Yeah.
translate in ChatGPT. I think the thing to remember, the disclaimer there is, it appears from what I can gather, nothing is as good at translating as a person. Things get lost in translation, meanings get a little bit skewed, words and things. And remember, you've got to remember as well, particularly in non-European languages, there are simply not the words that we have in the English language in other languages, and that can
Mm.
cause real confusion. Or they don't have the meaning, so they kind of translate it literally, and you lose the nuanced meaning to some of those key terms that we teach as sociologists. Anyway, so that worked. And then so anyway, so I got this answer translated into Ukrainian, and then I said, mark this answer using this, and it leveled it
Wow.
correctly, and it said this is a level 2 answer, and I was like, bang on, well done. And it actually told me why it was a level 2 answer, and it kind of said something like, you've got the information, the comprehension, but it didn't evaluate, or something like that. So it can't give you targets, it's not that intuitive, or at least I didn't ask it to be that intuitive. But it was able to level it and give feedback in the first language, so
It's
the
crazy. I
student
mean,
would know.
irrespective of EAL, I'm just thinking that is just crazy. That's blown my mind. Sorry to
Yeah. So
interrupt you. I was
it can
like,
do it in English as well. It can do it in English if you want, if you had a learner. So yeah. So it was accurate, and I tried it a few times, and it worked every time I did it. So my marking matched the marking of Chat GTP. So I was like, that's
I'm
fantastic.
laughing. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm just not laughing at it. I'm just, it's more out of shock. I
Yeah.
think that what shocked me was not only can it mark it, but also, so I'm assuming the mark scheme is in English, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the student is writing in their first language.
Yeah.
It's
So
market. It's crazy.
what I did was I put the mark scheme into English. I gave it then the version. I gave it Ukrainian. I then translated it into English. Then I got it to mark it, and it marked it correctly. Then I asked it to give the feedback in Ukrainian, and it gave the feedback in Ukrainian. So yeah, there are lots of, and that's one of the small issues with it. It's fantastic, but is it practical in the classroom? There is quite a bit of faff to go around. You have to practice, I think, a lot, because it's instantaneous, my word, but
Yeah.
you would have to go back to this person quite constantly, and you'd have to type it into together. It's very much a collaborative relationship between the student and the teacher, and using that same device. But if you
Mm.
can do that, how fantastic. And
Mm.
if you've all got them sat down working on an essay and you're doing live feedback, that is live feedback. It's just using the Chat GTP. Now, that's one thing. So you've got this security, you've got this student who's just written an essay in Ukrainian, it's at a level 2. So you could then potentially type in and say, right, we know as teachers generally what has to happen to get from level 2 to level 3, or level 3 to level 4, perhaps something like that. So you might say, maybe you need another paragraph, something like that. Anyway, that's fine. That's what could happen. Or you can then say to them, brilliant, you're at a level 2. So you, in your head, you've gauged this student is working at X level, but they don't get examined in Ukrainian. So what I would always recommend is you then say, right, I'm happy that I know that your knowledge is at X place. I would like you now to translate your essay and try and write it in English. And you can say, I know that you know the knowledge. This is you experimenting with language. Can you apply your translations now. And the good thing is about this is the students already been praised. It's that equity rich model. You're not giving them a challenge that they are just intimidated by. You're saying you've already done it. Now just try it in a different way. And they're not going to write as much, and it's not going to be probably as skilled, perhaps. It's maybe going to have, but they've already done it once and succeeded. And I think that's really good. And that's something that we call translanguaging, where you utilize their first language as a springboard into the new language. And that's an equity rich element, because rather than constantly saying you don't write well enough, you go, you write brilliantly in that language, now let's practice in that language. And it might take longer. They might need to have it as a homework, whereas the other students have got a different homework perhaps. But they are practicing their skills, they're translating, but they are also secure in the knowledge, and you're secure in the knowledge that they've got it. Their access to the curriculum is not compromised. They understand the concepts, they understand the skills. You're now focusing on that language acquisition and experimentation. So that was one of the ways in which I've been playing with ChatGTP as a form of assistive technology for students who have access the curriculum through a second language.
Wow, I'm actually speechless. I mean, wow, I didn't even think of that. I mean, I've used it to do like quizzes and write me sort of mock answers where we can mark them, but I didn't even think of that for our students. And I was thinking to myself as you were talking, it's that the idea that the students then are, like you said, are praised, and they're that springboard of feeling like, well, actually I do know the stuff. I think it's something similar I've done previously with students that feel are maybe coming in quite sort of a lower level of English, maybe just sort of got level, I suppose, equivalent level 4s probably, and I've just got in and I've got them to write an essay about anything they love. Do you know what I mean? So that they sort of then feel like, actually I do know how to write essays. It's just that I now need to develop the knowledge, which is the other way around from what you were talking about, almost the opposite. But that's blown my mind. That really has. I know we could speak forever because I have got lots of other questions to ask you, but I feel like if it's all right with you to ask you to come back on again, because I really, really want to find more about how we can support our, because obviously in sociology, differential achievement is something that we have to talk, we have to talk about in sociology, but also I feel like we have to be able to do that within our classroom as well. Although we talk about it, we have to be able to do it within our classroom and to prevent all those pitfalls that we talk about in the curriculum.
It's really easy, isn't it? It's really easy where morality, and this is this is a real bugbear of mine. We've lost morality in education, and as practitioners, because our currency is outcome, we forget, even though we teach the content, where content shows inequality and systemic kind of discrimination and all of these things, these critical theorists, we are still ultimately trying to get the best amount out of the currency, be the wealthiest department. Have I got ALPS 1 and 2? And we forget that actually there is morality in education. These are young people, these are developing adults who are absolute, and particularly our EAL learners, students who are not native to this country. They are just the cognitive load that they experience day to day. Even those students that are fluent, even those students that might be really able to be left independently, they are translating, they are almost daily interacting with unknown stimulus. They are having to navigate, they're having to apply knowledge that they don't necessarily have, and learn from those mistakes, which is obviously what we all do. But I think we always forget just how hard it is to be a learner today, and that morality in our education is really needed to come back in. And at the end of the day, the government aren't going to do it, and so it's us as practitioners in our classroom that have to.
I can hear your passion, that this is your why. This is why you do it, and this is why you go each day into the advisory role. I feel this is not enough.
Normally.
Yeah, it's so interesting, so powerful, and I don't want to sort of skirt across things. So I will be messaging you straight after this and saying, look, can we look at how we support? Because obviously I know that that's your area you're working with. So I know we've looked at EAL, but how, as like you said, morally in education. how do we support our learners so we're not, we're teaching stuff and then we're actually doing stuff, avoiding the stuff that we've taught in the classroom. Particularly, and this is what I just want to signpost, is, as you mentioned earlier, the traveller community, who for some reason, this is just my sideline, isn't like mentioned when we teach the sociology of education with ethnicity. I'm just going to leave it there because I feel like this is a conversation in itself. I mean, I personally teach it and I've written it on here in a big sort of square, but it's not. And I want to sort of look and explore and your ideas and really sort of pull your thoughts around this. But I want to say thank you. What I want to say, just, is there any recommended reading that if anyone particularly is interested in it, that would like to sort of, if there's a particular website or a book?
Oh gosh, there's so much. There is so much. I mean, it depends. I suppose it depends on what approach you want to come into. So the Runnymede group, they focus on kind of minority ethnic research. They don't. I don't know if they do EAL per se, but they definitely have some fantastic researchers and papers about institutionalized racism and the many forms. So those people that teach paper 3, it would be fantastic if you want to Google Runnymede. They've got a fantastic thing about like over policing and target hardening, and they've also got a paper I think recently came out about kind of like over policing in schools. So I think that links obviously to exclusion data and things like that. In
Yeah.
terms of EAL, I think Start at the Bell, that is a fantastic resource. There are what I'll probably do is maybe I will email you links and maybe
Yes,
you can like add
please.
it under the video, because it depends
That's a
on
good
what
idea.
floats your boat. Because a lot of the stuff as well is basic. Oh, it's not basic, but it's teaching and learning. So theories about metacognition, they are they are to do with cognitive science, and then what you have to do is layer in the sociological ideas of culture and ethnicity. So all of that stuff about self-regulated learners and the importance of those two strands of metacognition, and that's the big thing. Don't forget that there's a second strand of metacognition that Ofsted and other leaders do not talk about. So yes, there is the agility and control over your knowledge, but there's also the need that has to be balanced with the control over your own cognitive processes. And if you are not attuned to how your cognitive processing works, all those low stake quizzes do nothing, because you have to balance the two as practitioners, which is why I said things like productive failure and generation, they fall into that second strand of control over one's cognitive processing, balanced with control over one's information. Blend the two and you
Amazing.
have you have the best learner. So I think all of those things are really good. And what I'll do is I'll find some particular EAL, and like you said, it's thin on the ground, particularly at A level. There's probably not as much information about supporting EAL learners post 16 as there is any other age group, definitely. But
Yeah.
I'll have a little look and see what I can pull out of my library.
Oh yes, please. I'm really passionate about this. Maybe because of my mum and her sort of background. I think I know for me, it's just like a more anecdotal bit of idea is it called idioms, where like part of the English language is to sort of use that as a second generation. I don't personally understand them, so I know I do love an analogy, but I think it's more the sort of the, I don't know, I can't even think of one.
Oh,
I
no,
can't think of one.
that's
Yeah,
quite often like pull your socks up. Yeah, no,
yeah,
absolutely. We quite often say like do not. One of our recommendations to teachers when we write reports for specific children, obviously, it might be something like avoid using symbolic language or language that requires that kind of insight, because bless them, you take it literally. What
no,
do you mean pull my socks up? Oh, my socks are pulled up. What do we, and that's where
yeah,
those cultural norms clash with learners as well. So
yeah,
it's not just their proficiency in the language, it's also their ability to navigate all forms of language, like symbolism and metaphors and
yeah,
sarcasm, which, let's face it, we're not allowed to be sarcastic with students anyway, because you offend too many people when you're sarcastic. But definitely. And then of course it does open the debate of EAL in terms of second generation, third generation migrants, so children whose parents were born in this country, but there's still the legacy of the EAL kind of barrier, particularly culturally as well. And I think that's a really interesting thing, as we have a aging migrant population who have increasingly got, next generations who are, born in the UK and have always known the UK, doesn't mean that they're necessarily first language speakers. And I think that's a really that's a big can of worms to open, that one.
Oh, I'm definitely gonna get you back on. I'm definitely gonna get you back on. I'm gonna message you later about this. But thank you for your time, Vicky. I really appreciate it, and have a lovely evening. It's gonna like blow my mind. So thank
And
you.
thank you very much.
Really
Thank you.
impressive. Thank you. Thank you for your
Right,
passion.
see you
Thank
later.
you. Thank you. Bye bye.